I'm Alice, and I'm 28 years old. My cousin Jessica just rolled her eyes at me, marched over, and announced, "You can't afford this place. We're in the VIP area." I walked past her like she was furniture. She waved frantically at the security guard, her voice rising to that shrill pitch she gets when she's about to embarrass herself. "Remove her, she's making a scene." The security guard looked at Jessica, then at me, and said 4 words that changed everything. "Ma'am, she owns this place. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely underestimated by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me back up and explain how I ended up owning the most exclusive country club in Connecticut, while my own family treated me like I was still broke. 3 years ago, my father's investment firm collapsed overnight. Not gradually, not with warning signs overnight. One day he was managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions. The next day, federal investigators were carrying boxes out of his office. The family whispered about poor financial decisions, risky investments, maybe even fraud. None of it was true, but perception became reality faster than wildfire spreading through dry grass. When word spread through our extended family, something interesting happened. Phone calls stopped, holiday invitations disappeared. Suddenly, every cousin, aunt, and uncle who used to compete for my parents' attention at family gatherings became too busy to return messages. My uncle Robert, who'd borrowed $50,000 from Dad just 2 years earlier for his son's wedding, acted like he'd never heard our last name before. The speed of their abandonment was almost impressive if you appreciate efficiency and cruelty. The thing is, they all assumed we were broke. They assumed wrong. While Dad's firm was crumbling, I was already 3 years into building my own tech company. I'd graduated Harvard at 22 with a computer science degree and immediately started developing data analytics software for financial institutions. By the time Dad's world fell apart, my company was generating millions in revenue annually. But here's the funny part: nobody bothered to ask how we were doing. They just wrote us off and moved on like we'd never existed. Dad's too proud to tell anyone I've been quietly supporting the family. Mom's too embarrassed to admit their daughter is the one keeping the lights on. And me? Well, I've been watching from the sidelines, taking notes on who really cares about family when things get tough. Spoiler alert, it's a very short list that doesn't include most of our blood relatives. Last month, I made what my financial advisor called an excellent investment opportunity. Brookstone Country Club was being sold by aging owners whose children had no interest in hospitality management. 200-acre property, championship golf course, established clientele, and steady revenue streams. The numbers made perfect business sense, so I bought it outright with a cash offer that closed in 5 days. Pure business decision, nothing personal about it at all. Until yesterday when I saw something interesting in our family group chat. Yes, they kept me in it, probably forgot I was there. Grandmother Eleanor's 85th birthday celebration, scheduled for today. Location? Brookstone Country Club. The irony was too delicious to ignore. The same family that had spent 3 years treating us like social pariahs was about to celebrate at my club, having no idea who owned it. I couldn't resist the opportunity to see their faces when they realized exactly how wrong they'd been about their poor relatives' circumstances. So I decided to make an appearance at their little celebration, purely for my own entertainment. Sometimes the universe hands you gift-wrapped opportunities for justice, and it would be rude not to accept them gracefully. The country club's main dining room was exactly as pretentious as I remembered from childhood visits. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, oil paintings of long-dead members lined mahogany-paneled walls, and every surface gleamed with the kind of polish that screamed, "Your money better be old enough to vote." I'd always thought this place was ridiculous growing up. Now I owned it, which meant I could appreciate the ridiculousness from a position of power rather than teenage resentment. I spotted our family immediately. They'd claimed the largest table on the terrace, overlooking the 18th hole where men in pastel polo shirts pretended golf was more important than the business deals they were actually discussing between swings. Grandmother Eleanor sat at the head like a queen holding court, my Aunt Margaret fussing over her champagne glass with the dedication of a sommelier, Uncle Robert gesturing dramatically while telling some story that had everyone laughing with the forced enthusiasm of people determined to have a good time. They looked happy, relaxed, unburdened by the presence of their financially ruined relatives. The absence of guilt on their faces was almost artistic in its completeness. These people had perfected the art of selective memory, rewriting family history to exclude inconvenient relatives who might dampen their celebration. Jessica saw me first. Her expression shifted from surprise to annoyance to something approaching panic in about 3 seconds flat, like watching someone's face process the stages of a natural disaster in real time. She whispered something to her mother, Aunt Margaret, who turned to stare at me with barely concealed horror. The whispers spread around the table like a virus through a cruise ship, each person's reaction more dramatic than the last. Uncle Robert stopped mid-sentence, his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips. My cousin David actually put his hand to his forehead like he was getting a migraine just from seeing me. The performance was so coordinated it could have been choreographed, except none of them were that good at acting when they weren't trying to be cruel. Well, Grandmother Eleanor's voice carried across the terrace with the authority of someone accustomed to controlling conversations through sheer force of personality. This is unexpected. I approached the table with what I hoped looked like confidence rather than the sick satisfaction I actually felt bubbling up from somewhere deep in my chest. Happy birthday, Grandmother. You look wonderful. Thank you, dear. Her tone suggested I'd complimented her on a particularly unpleasant medical procedure. We weren't expecting you. I can see that. I gestured toward the empty chairs scattered around nearby tables, noting how quickly extra seating disappeared when you were trying to exclude someone from family celebrations. Plenty of room, though. Aunt Margaret cleared her throat with the delicacy of someone preparing to deliver bad news to a small child who still believed in fairy tales. Alice, darling, we should probably explain. This is a private celebration. Family only. The statement hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, acrid and impossible to ignore. Family only. As if the last 28 years of Christmas mornings and birthday parties and graduation ceremonies had been some kind of elaborate misunderstanding. As if blood relation had an expiration date tied to bank account balances and social embarrassment levels. I see. I nodded slowly, letting my gaze move around the table with the methodical precision of someone taking inventory. Family only. Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his collar suddenly seeming too tight around his neck. It's nothing personal, Alice. It's just, well, circumstances have changed, haven't they? We thought it might be awkward for everyone involved. Awkward for whom, specifically? For everyone, Jessica chimed in, her voice taking on that condescending tone she'd perfected during 4 years at an expensive prep school that taught her to look down on people with more grace and less obvious cruelty. Let's be honest, Alice. You can barely afford rent, let alone membership here. It's embarrassing for the family. That's when I smiled. Not a fake smile, not a polite smile, but the kind of smile that makes people suddenly remember they left something important in their car and should probably go check on it immediately. You're absolutely right, Jessica. It would be embarrassing, if it were true. Grandmother Eleanor raised an eyebrow that had been surgically perfected sometime during the Reagan administration. I'm sorry, dear? Oh, don't apologize. It's an honest mistake. I pulled out my phone with deliberate slowness, enjoying the way their eyes tracked the movement like cats watching a laser pointer. This is interesting timing, actually. I just closed on a new property this week. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the sprinkler system cycling on the golf course in the distance. You know that moment in movies where the record scratches and everyone freezes? This was exactly like that, except with more expensive jewelry and deeper tans from winter vacations, in places that required private jets to reach. What kind of property? David asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to know the answer. Oh, just a little place with good bones. 200 acres, championship golf course, clubhouse with fascinating history dating back to the 1920s. I paused for effect, watching their faces with the careful attention of a scientist observing a particularly interesting chemical reaction. You might know it. Brookstone Country Club. Jessica's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips like she'd been turned to stone mid-sip. Uncle Robert's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air on a dock. Even Grandmother Eleanor, who'd maintained her composure through everything from stock market crashes to family scandals, looked genuinely stunned for the first time in my memory. That's impossible, Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible above the afternoon breeze rustling through the carefully manicured landscaping. Is it? I tucked my phone back into my purse with deliberate casualness. The previous owners were eager to sell to the right buyer. The color drained from multiple faces so fast I thought someone might need medical attention. This was better than I'd imagined, and I'd imagined it would be pretty spectacular. The mathematical impossibility of their assumptions crashing against the reality of my success was creating a kind of cognitive dissonance that was almost physically painful to watch. Alice, Uncle Robert found his voice first, though it came out several octaves higher than usual and slightly strangled. We had no idea about your success. Of course you didn't. I kept my tone light, conversational, like we were discussing the weather instead of their complete miscalculation of my financial situation over the past 3 years. You never asked. 3 years of radio silence tends to limit communication opportunities. Now wait just a minute. Aunt Margaret set down her glass with enough force to slosh champagne onto the pristine white tablecloth, creating a spreading stain that seemed symbolically appropriate. We've been giving you space to figure things out after James's difficulties. We didn't want to intrude during such a challenging time. How thoughtful of you. The sarcasm practically dripped from my voice like honey from a broken jar. Sweet but impossible to ignore. I'm sure it had nothing to do with Dad's firm collapsing or your assumption that we'd become financial liabilities who might embarrass you at social functions. Grandmother Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her diamond necklace catching the afternoon light in tiny rainbows that somehow made the moment even more surreal. Alice, dear, you're being dramatic. Family sometimes goes through periods of necessary distance. Distance? I repeated the word like I was tasting something unpleasant. Is that what we're calling 3 years of complete exclusion from family events? Because I have a different word for it. The tension at the table was thick enough to cut with a knife. My cousins exchanged nervous glances like kids caught cheating on a test. Their parents looked like they were calculating how quickly they could exit this conversation with their dignity intact. Spoiler alert. That ship had already sailed, hit an iceberg, and was currently sinking to the bottom of the social ocean. David, who'd been silent up until now, tried a different approach with the diplomacy of someone who'd spent years mediating family disputes. Look, Alice, if there's been some misunderstanding about our intentions— Oh, there's been no misunderstanding. I gestured toward the table like a game show host, revealing a particularly disappointing prize. You made it crystal clear where I stand in this family hierarchy. Today just confirmed it with mathematical precision. Jessica's shock was morphing into anger, her face flushing that particular shade of red that happened when she realized she wasn't going to get her way. You can't seriously expect us to believe you own this entire place. Last we heard, you were working at some tech startup, living in a studio apartment. Last you heard was 3 years ago, Jessica. Things change when you're not paying attention. I smiled again. The same smile that had made her squirm since we were children fighting over who got the bigger slice of birthday cake. Some of us adapt and grow. Others just make assumptions and hope for the best. Have you ever experienced someone completely underestimating your potential? Share your stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you proved them wrong. The security guard, a tall, distinguished man named Thomas, who'd been working here longer than some members had been breathing, appeared at my elbow with the kind of professional deference that money could buy and respect had to earn. Miss Alice, good afternoon. Is everything satisfactory with your guests today? The word guests landed like a small bomb on the table, sending shockwaves through the carefully constructed social dynamics they'd assumed were still in play, because that's what they were now, my guests, in my club, where they'd assumed I couldn't afford to set foot without embarrassing myself and them by association. Actually, Thomas, I think there might be some confusion about the seating arrangements and service expectations. Of course, Miss Alice. Shall I have the staff prepare additional seating for your party? That won't be necessary. I kept my voice pleasant while watching my family's faces register the implications, like dominoes falling in slow motion. But perhaps you could explain the club's current ownership situation to my relatives. I think there may be some outdated information circulating. Thomas turned to address the table with the kind of polished courtesy that came from years of dealing with entitled rich people who thought their money made them better than the staff serving them. Certainly. Brookstone Country Club is currently under new ownership as of last month. All previous memberships have been suspended pending review and reapplication through the new management structure. Uncle Robert's face went from pale to gray to something approaching green. Suspended all memberships? Yes, sir. Letters were sent to all former members explaining the transition process and application requirements for renewed membership. The new ownership is committed to maintaining Brookstone's exclusive standards while ensuring all members align with the club's evolved values and expectations. Aunt Margaret's voice climbed an octave and gained a note of hysteria. Applications? We've been members here for 20 years. Our children learned to swim in that pool. Yes, ma'am. The new owner is evaluating all applications based on character, community standing, and demonstration of the values that Brookstone wishes to represent going forward. Thomas delivered this with such professional neutrality that I wanted to give him a raise on the spot. Jessica grabbed her mother's arm like she was drowning, and Aunt Margaret was a life preserver. Mom, what does this mean for today? For our celebration? It means, I said before Thomas could respond, my voice carrying clearly across the terrace, that you're here as my personal guest today. Whether you stay for the full celebration depends entirely on how well you can conduct yourselves appropriately. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that you could practically hear their worldview cracking like ice in spring. 3 years of treating us like social pariahs, 3 years of exclusion and whispered conversations about our financial ruin, 3 years of assumptions about our place in the family hierarchy, all of it crumbling in real time as they realized who actually held the power now. Well, Grandmother Eleanor said after a moment that stretched like taffy, this is certainly unexpected news. Isn't it? I agreed cheerfully. Life has a way of surprising us when we're not paying attention to what's actually happening around us. Alice. David leaned forward with the careful intensity of someone trying to defuse a bomb they'd accidentally armed. Perhaps we should discuss this situation privately. Family matters should be handled within the family. Should they? I tilted my head like I was considering this fascinating new concept. Because for the past 3 years, I haven't felt particularly included in family matters. Today seems like an excellent opportunity to change that dynamic. Thomas cleared his throat diplomatically. Miss Alice, shall I inform the kitchen that you'll be staying for the birthday celebration lunch service? This was the moment I'd been building toward. The perfect setup for the perfect exit. I looked around the table one more time, taking in the mixture of embarrassment, calculation, and dawning realization that their behavior of the past 3 years was about to have very specific and very expensive consequences. Actually, Thomas, I just stopped by to wish Grandmother Eleanor a happy birthday and say hello to everyone. I have other business appointments this afternoon that require my attention. Of course, Miss Alice. Shall I escort you to your car? That won't be necessary, but thank you. I picked up my purse and stood gracefully, smoothing my dress with the kind of casual elegance that money could buy, but breeding had to teach. Please, everyone, don't let my visit interrupt your celebration. Stay as long as you'd like and enjoy yourselves. I started to walk away, then paused as if remembering something important. The kind of pause that made everyone lean forward slightly, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Oh, and Thomas, please make sure my family receives the full premium service experience today. Individual billing for all orders, of course I want them to understand exactly what they're receiving. Thomas nodded with the gravity of someone receiving military orders. Understood, Miss Alice. Individual premium billing, with payment required before departure. Should there be any questions about the charges, what would you like me to tell them? Tell them they're receiving exactly what they ordered, nothing more, nothing less. If there are any concerns about the pricing, they're welcome to contact me directly. And if they're unable to reach you, then they'll need to resolve the situation themselves like adults. I turned back to the table with a smile that could have powered a small city. Enjoy your lunch, everyone. And happy birthday again, Grandmother. I do hope this celebration is everything you deserve. The silence that followed my departure was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat as I walked through the clubhouse. Behind me, I knew 8 people were sitting in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened and what was about to happen when they realized the full implications of individual premium billing at one of the most expensive restaurants in Connecticut. Thomas followed me discreetly to the main desk, where I handed him a business card with very specific instructions written on the back. Everything they order gets the full premium treatment. If they try to claim family rates or house accounts, remind them that all previous arrangements have been canceled. If they refuse to pay, we follow standard club policy for billing disputes. He finished with a smile that suggested he was going to enjoy the next few hours immensely. Exactly. And Thomas? I'll be monitoring the security system remotely. Make sure they know that. I drove exactly 2 blocks away and parked at the coffee shop across from the club's main entrance, where I had a perfect view of both the terrace and the parking lot. More importantly, I had access to something even better, the club's upgraded security system, which I could monitor from my phone thanks to the comprehensive technological improvements I'd installed as the new owner. Pulling up the camera feed, I watched my relatives huddle together like conspirators plotting a coup. The audio was crystal clear through the new microphone system. "This is a disaster," Aunt Margaret was saying, her voice pitched high with panic. "Do you have any idea what this means for our social standing? It means Alice has been playing us for fools," Jessica snapped, her anger overriding her shock. "How long has she been rich? How long has she been laughing at us behind our backs?" "The question," Grandmother Eleanor said with her usual authority, "is what we do now to repair this situation. We fix this," Uncle Robert declared with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered a problem money couldn't solve. "We're family. This is just a misunderstanding that got out of hand because of poor communication." "Is it?" A familiar voice cut through their conversation like a knife through butter. I adjusted the camera angle and saw my parents approaching the table, both dressed in the kind of casual elegance that money could buy and confidence had to earn. Dad looked exactly like what he was, a successful businessman enjoying his semi-retirement. Mom practically glowed with the satisfaction of someone who knew her daughter had just purchased the club where people were currently panicking about her financial success. "James, Patricia!" Grandmother Eleanor's voice was unnaturally bright, like someone commenting on the weather during a tornado. "We were just discussing Alice's wonderful news about her business success." "Were you?" my mother asked with the kind of neutral tone that could freeze champagne mid-pour. What followed was the most entertaining conversation I'd ever witnessed through a security camera. My parents, armed with the knowledge of what had just transpired, faced down 3 years of family rejection with the kind of calm dignity that made their relatives squirm in their chairs like children caught lying about broken vases. "We should celebrate!" David suddenly announced, his voice too loud and too enthusiastic, like someone trying to convince themselves they were having fun. "This is incredible news. Our Alice, owning Brookstone." "Our Alice?" my father repeated quietly, and the two words carried more weight than a full speech. But what happened next exceeded even my wildest expectations, because instead of showing appropriate shame or attempting to leave gracefully, my family decided to double down on their newfound enthusiasm for my success. "You know what?" Jessica said, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke to the waiter who'd approached their table. "We'll have champagne, the Dom Pérignon. This is a celebration." I nearly choked on my coffee. After 3 years of pretending I didn't exist, they were now planning to celebrate my success. The audacity was breathtaking. "Absolutely!" Uncle Robert was nodding enthusiastically. "Our family just acquired this magnificent property. Alice is our niece." Through the camera, I watched them transform from shocked relatives into social media influencers who just discovered their meal was comped. They were practically preening, completely missing the irony that they were celebrating the success of someone they'd ignored for 3 years. "We'll need additional seating," Aunt Margaret added regally. "Some of our friends will want to join us once they hear this exciting family news." I watched in fascination as they began making phone calls, inviting friends to witness their association with the new owner of Brookstone Country Club. The revisionist history happening in real time was worthy of academic study. Within 30 minutes, the table had grown from 8 people to nearly 15 as friends and acquaintances arrived to bask in the reflected glory of knowing the family that owns Brookstone. The irony was so thick you could serve it with a spoon, but they were too intoxicated by their newfound social status to taste it. Through the security feed, I watched Jessica holding court like a queen, describing how she'd always known Alice was destined for greatness to anyone who would listen. The woman who'd just tried to have me removed from the premises was now claiming credit for recognizing my potential. "We've been so proud of her journey," Uncle Robert told a rapt audience of country club social climbers. "Even during the challenging times with James's firm, we knew Alice would land on her feet and soar even higher." The revisionist history was stunning. These people could have taught masterclasses in rewriting reality to suit their current needs. I watched them order round after round of premium champagne, elaborate appetizer platters, and the kind of expensive delicacies that would have impressed a Roman emperor. "Our family has always been close," Aunt Margaret was explaining to someone's wife who looked appropriately impressed. "We support each other through everything. That's what real family does." I had to pause the video and take a moment to appreciate the sheer artistry of their self-deception. The same people who'd spent 3 years avoiding us like we carried a social disease were now lecturing others about family loyalty and support. My parents, I noticed, had taken seats at the far end of the table and were watching this performance with expressions of fascinated horror. Mom caught Dad's eye and shook her head slightly, her meaning clear. These people had learned absolutely nothing from the confrontation. The Dom Pérignon arrived multiple bottles of it, along with the premium sushi platter, oysters flown in from both coasts, and various delicacies that cost more per ounce than most people spent on entire meals. Each addition to their celebration was being itemized separately on individual bills that were growing larger by the minute. "To family loyalty and Alice's incredible success." Jessica raised her glass in a toast that made my stomach turn with its irony. Family loyalty. From the people who'd ghosted us for 3 years. But the real entertainment was yet to come, because around hour 2 of their impromptu celebration, Thomas appeared at their table with a leather folder and the kind of serious expression that meant business was about to be discussed. "Excuse me," Thomas said with perfect politeness, "but I need to discuss the billing arrangements for this afternoon's service." The conversation around the table died instantly, like someone had hit a mute button on their celebration. Jessica looked up from her 4th glass of champagne with the slightly glassy expression of someone who'd been drinking expensive alcohol on an empty stomach and an inflated ego. "Billing arrangements?" she repeated, as if the words were in a foreign language she didn't quite understand. "Yes, ma'am. As Miss Alice mentioned, all charges today will be itemized individually. The kitchen asked me to verify whether you'd like to continue with the current level of service or make any adjustments to your orders." The reality check was immediate and brutal. Uncle Robert, who'd been gesturing expansively while telling stories about our close family bond, suddenly looked like he'd been slapped with a frozen fish. "Individual billing?" Uncle Robert's voice cracked slightly on the words. "There must be some mistake. We're Alice's family. Surely there's a family rate or house account arrangement. Thomas maintained his professional composure with the skill of someone who'd delivered expensive news to entitled customers countless times before. I'm afraid all previous arrangements have been canceled pending the membership review process, sir. Miss Alice was very specific about today's billing structure. But we're celebrating her success, Aunt Margaret protested, her voice taking on that entitled tone that suggested she'd never been told no by service staff in her entire privileged life. This is a family celebration. Indeed, ma'am. Miss Alice wanted to ensure her family received the finest possible service today. Thomas consulted his tablet with theatrical precision. Currently, the party has ordered 4 bottles of Dom Pérignon at $350 each, 2 bottles of Opus 1 at $500 each, the premium sushi selection at $400, various imported appetizers totaling $800, an exclusive terrace service for groups over 10 people at $200 per hour. The silence that followed was so profound, I could hear the golf course sprinklers cycling through the security feed. I watched faces around the table as the mathematical reality penetrated their champagne-induced euphoria. Nearly $5,000, and they'd only been celebrating for 2 hours. That seems excessive, Grandmother Eleanor said carefully, her voice carrying the tone of someone who'd just discovered her house was built on quicksand. These are our standard premium rates, ma'am. Miss Alice specifically requested that her family receive our finest service and products. Thomas delivered this with such professional neutrality that I wanted to promote him immediately. This is outrageous, Jessica declared, her celebration mood evaporating faster than champagne bubbles in an open bottle. We shouldn't have to pay these ridiculous prices. We're family. I understand your concern, ma'am. Would you like me to contact Miss Alice to discuss the billing arrangement? Yes, Uncle Robert said desperately. Call her immediately. I watched Thomas pull out his phone with theatrical precision, dial a number, wait exactly 10 seconds, then hang up with an expression of professional regret. I'm afraid Miss Alice isn't answering her phone. Shall I leave a voicemail message? Try again, Jessica demanded, her voice rising with panic. 3 more fake calls followed, each one building the tension at the table like a pressure cooker approaching maximum capacity. My parents, I noticed, were watching this performance with barely concealed amusement. They knew exactly what was happening, even if the others were still catching up to reality. The friends they'd invited to their impromptu celebration were starting to excuse themselves, suddenly remembering important appointments elsewhere. Nothing cleared a party faster than the possibility of being asked to split a $5,000 bill that nobody had seen coming. Maybe we should just pay it and sort this out later, one of Jessica's remaining friends suggested quietly. Pay it? Jessica's voice reached a pitch that could shatter crystal. Do you have any idea how insulting this is? We're being treated like common customers instead of family. Perhaps that's because, my father said quietly, you've been treating Alice like a common stranger instead of family for the past 3 years. The truth landed like a sledgehammer in a glass factory. Uncle Robert's face flushed red with indignation rather than embarrassment. This is completely inappropriate. We're Alice's family. You don't charge family premium rates for a birthday celebration. Actually, Thomas said with admirable patience, Miss Alice was quite clear that family receives exactly the same treatment as anyone else, no special privileges. No discounted rates and payment required before departure. This is insulting. Aunt Margaret stood up so quickly her chair nearly toppled backward. We've been members here for decades. We have standing in this community. You can't treat us like we're paying customers? My mother suggested helpfully. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a particularly expensive cigar. These people weren't upset about the money, they were furious about being treated like everyone else, instead of receiving the special treatment they felt entitled to as family. We demand to speak with the manager, Jessica declared with the righteous indignation of someone who'd never been denied anything in her life. I am the manager, ma'am, Thomas replied smoothly. However, if you'd prefer to discuss this matter with the owner, I can certainly attempt to reach Miss Alice again. Yes, get Alice on the phone right now. I watched through the security feed as Jessica grabbed her own phone and started dialing frantically. The look of growing panic on her face when I didn't answer was absolutely priceless. She tried calling from different phones, sending increasingly desperate text messages, even attempting to reach me through social media. My phone was buzzing nonstop with their attempts to contact me. Alice, there's been a misunderstanding about the billing. Jessica, call us immediately. Uncle Robert, this is your grandmother. We need to speak now. Eleanor, please answer your phone. David. Each unanswered message made them more frantic. The friends they'd invited to bask in their reflected glory had completely disappeared, leaving them alone with a bill they felt too entitled to pay and no way to reach the person who could resolve their situation. This is absolutely unacceptable, Uncle Robert declared, pacing beside the table like a caged animal. We refuse to pay these outrageous charges. This is family harassment. Thomas nodded sympathetically. I understand your frustration, sir. However, club policy requires payment for all services rendered. If you're unable to settle the bill, I'll need to follow our standard procedures for billing disputes. Which are? Grandmother Eleanor asked, though her voice suggested she didn't really want to know the answer. Security escort and notification of local authorities, ma'am. Standard protocol for customers who refuse to pay for services received. The shock on their faces was absolutely perfect. These people had spent their entire lives being catered to, having rules bent for them, receiving special treatment because of their money and social standing. The idea that they might actually face consequences for refusing to pay a bill was completely foreign to their experience. You wouldn't dare, Jessica whispered. Ma'am, I'm simply following the policies established by the owner. Miss Alice was very specific about equal treatment for all customers, including family members. That's when Aunt Margaret played what she thought was her trump card. Fine, we'll pay the ridiculous bill, but Alice will hear about this. Our lawyers will be in touch about this harassment and extortion. Of course, ma'am. I'll make sure to document your threats of legal action in today's incident report. The casual way Thomas mentioned an incident report sent another wave of panic through the group. Legal threats were one thing, but having their behavior officially documented at their own social club was quite another. What happened next was even better than I'd imagined. Instead of quietly paying the bill and leaving with whatever dignity they could salvage, they decided to make a scene that would be remembered in Brookstone's history for years to come. This is discrimination! Uncle Robert shouted, his voice carrying across the terrace and drawing stares from other diners. We're being targeted because of our family relationship with the owner. Sir, please lower your voice, Thomas requested politely. You're disturbing other guests. We'll disturb whoever we want. This is our club. Actually, sir, this is Miss Alice's club. You're currently guests here, and guests are expected to conduct themselves appropriately. The correction was delivered so smoothly that it took a moment for the implications to sink in. They weren't members anymore. They weren't even customers. They were guests whose welcome was rapidly expiring. Grandmother Eleanor, recognizing the social disaster unfolding around her, finally stood up with the dignity that had carried her through decades of high society drama. Enough, she said quietly, but her voice cut through the chaos like a knife through silk. She opened her purse and pulled out a checkbook, with the resignation of someone who'd decided that preserving what remained of the family's reputation was worth $5,000. I'll pay the bill, she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the terrace where other diners were now openly staring at the spectacle. Mother, you can't! Jessica protested. It's the principle of the thing. The principle, Grandmother Eleanor said as she wrote the check with swift, angry strokes, is that we created this situation through our own poor judgment, and now we're going to face the consequences like adults instead of spoiled children. She handed the check to Thomas with the kind of cold dignity that made everyone else at the table look like amateurs at the game of social warfare. There's your payment in full. I trust this settles the matter? Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your prompt attention to this matter. As my family prepared to leave, subdued, embarrassed, and several $1,000s poorer, Grandmother Eleanor did something unexpected. She stopped at the edge of the terrace and looked directly at the security camera she somehow knew I was watching through. Alice, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the terrace with the authority of someone who'd never been ignored in her life. You made your point. We behaved badly, and we deserved this lesson. When you're ready to have an adult conversation about rebuilding our relationship, I'll be waiting. She walked away without expecting an answer, leaving behind a family that would never quite recover from the afternoon they learned that money couldn't buy their way out of consequences for treating people badly. But she wasn't finished. As they reached the parking lot, I watched through the external cameras as she turned to address the remaining family members who were still grumbling about the injustice of being charged for what they'd consumed. Let me be absolutely clear, she said, in a voice that could freeze champagne mid-pour. Alice owned this club. We came here uninvited and excluded her from a family celebration. She could have had us removed immediately. Instead, she let us stay and learn exactly how it feels to be treated the way we've been treating her family for 3 years. If you can't see the justice in that, then you've learned nothing from this experience. The parking lot confrontation continued for another 10 minutes, with various family members arguing about who was to blame and what they should do next. Through it all, Grandmother Eleanor maintained her dignity while making it clear that she, at least, understood exactly what had transpired and why. 3 hours later, I sat on my parents' porch, sharing the most honest family conversation we'd had in years. The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across their garden, and the silence was comfortable rather than strained for the first time since Dad's business had collapsed. "So," Dad said, grinning over his coffee cup, "how does it feel to own the place where you just delivered the most expensive lesson in consequences our family has ever received?" "Profitable," I replied, and we all laughed with the kind of genuine amusement that comes from watching justice served with perfect precision and professional catering. "Your grandmother called," Mom said gently. "She wants to have lunch, just the two of you." I considered this information while watching a cardinal build its nest in the oak tree that had shaded my childhood reading sessions. Grandmother Eleanor had been the only one to truly understand what had happened today, the only one to take responsibility instead of making excuses or threatening lawsuits. "Did she mention where she wanted to meet?" "Brookstone Country Club," Mom smiled. "She said she'd like to see what you've done with the place, and she wants to submit a membership application." "A membership application?" "She said she wants to go through the same process as everyone else. No special treatment. No family privileges. She wants to earn her place based on character and community standing." The gesture was more meaningful than any apology could have been. Grandmother Eleanor understood that respect had to be earned rather than assumed, and she was willing to prove that she'd learned from the afternoon's expensive lesson. My phone had finally stopped buzzing with desperate messages from various family members. I'd read them all, the angry threats, the manipulative guilt trips, the bargaining attempts, and eventually, the genuine apologies from the few who'd actually understood what had transpired. Uncle Robert's message was typical. "This was a gross overreaction. Family doesn't treat family this way." Jessica's was predictably self-centered. "I can't believe you humiliated us in public like that. My friends will never let me live this down." But David's message was different. "I understand why you did what you did. We had it coming. When you're ready to talk, I'd like to hear about your business. I think I owe you about 3 years' worth of congratulations." And then there was Aunt Margaret's message, which had arrived just an hour ago. "Your grandmother made us understand some things we should have realized years ago. We were wrong about everything. Would you consider letting us try again?" I wasn't ready to answer most of them. Some bridges could be rebuilt, but others had been burned too thoroughly to salvage. Time would tell which was which. "The interesting thing about today," I said to my parents, "is that it wasn't really about the money or the club or even the humiliation. It was about respect. For 3 years, they assumed they could write us off and pick up the relationship whenever it became convenient for them again. And now?" Dad asked. "Now they know that relationships don't work that way. You can't ignore people when times are tough, and then expect warmth when circumstances change." The sun was setting over the golf course visible in the distance, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that made everything look peaceful and permanent. Tomorrow, I'd return to running my business and managing my new investment property. I'd probably approve Grandmother Eleanor's membership application and consider a few others on a case-by-case basis. But tonight, I was content to sit with the people who'd never wavered in their love and support, watching the day end with the satisfaction of a job well done. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept less than you deserve. Whether it's in business, relationships, or family dynamics, knowing your worth and insisting others respect it isn't arrogance, it's survival. My phone buzzed with one final message of the day, this one from Thomas. "Miss Alice, I wanted to let you know that today's events have become quite the topic of conversation among the staff. The team is honored to work for someone who values fairness and consequences over family politics. We're looking forward to building something special here. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of standing up for yourself and choosing the family that actually deserves your loyalty. Remember, you teach people how to treat you, and sometimes the most effective lessons come with itemized receipts."